Welcome back to Storytime Boulevard, your destination to sleep. I'm your host, Andrew, and I'm so glad you're here. If you're enjoying our stories, be sure to check out our cozy playlists for more dreamy tales to help you drift off to sleep. And if our whimsical journeys have been keeping you company at night, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps us continue crafting these gentle adventures just for you. Tonight we'll take a quiet voyage to a place that may not appear on any map, yet feels as real as the sea breeze on your face. But before we set sail, let's take a few moments to settle in. Find a comfortable position, close your eyes if you wish, and let your shoulders soften. Feel the slow rise and fall of your breath, like the tide washing gently over sand. Imagine the air around you growing cooler and fresher, carrying the scent of salt water and the faint sound of gulls calling far in the distance. With every exhale, let the weight of the day drift away like a small boat pushed out to sea. Now, with your mind open and your heart light, let us begin the postcards from Moonlight Harbor. Eleanor Hayes had lived in her little white cottage by the sea for 23 years. And in that time, the days had folded into one another like pages in a well-loved book. Her mornings were quiet, a steaming mug of tea on the porch, the creak of her wicker chair, the sound of waves combing the shore. But on a pale, gold afternoon in late August, something unusual arrived in her mailbox. A postcard with a photograph of a harbour she had never seen. The image was bathed in silvery light, the kind that belongs only to a full moon. Fishing boats bobbed in gentle water, and a line of lanterns lit the curve of a pier. On the back, in neat handwriting, was a single sentence: "The tide remembers what we forget." There was no name, no return address, just a smudge of salt at the corner, as if it had travelled across the ocean to find her. Eleanor stared at the card, the fine hairs on her arms lifting, and for the first time in years, she felt that peculiar tug in her chest, a pull towards something unknown. That evening, she carried the postcard to her neighbour, Mr. Whitaker, who had been mending his fishing nets on his porch. "Moonlight Harbor," he murmured, turning the card in his weathered hands. "I've never heard of it, but it sounds like somewhere worth finding." Eleanor smiled faintly, tucking the postcard into her book on the side table, unaware that it would be the first of many, each one carrying her further toward a place she could neither name nor forget. 2 weeks later, on a morning washed in pale mist, Eleanor found the second postcard waiting in her mailbox. This one showed the same harbour, but from a different angle, as though the photographer had stepped onto the pier and walked a little farther into the scene. The moonlight was softer, hidden partly behind a gossamer cloud, and at the water's edge stood a small cafe with tables set for two, each with a single candle flickering in the night air. On the back, in that same neat, careful handwriting, were the words, "Follow the lanterns and listen for the sea's secret." Eleanor felt her pulse quicken. She brought the postcard inside, setting it beside the first, and noticed something she had missed before. The edges of the card were damp, as though it had been touched by real ocean spray moments before arriving. Unable to resist, she walked to Mr. Whitaker's porch again. "Well now," he said, examining the second card with a narrowing gaze. "It's like they're leading you somewhere, one step at a time." His tone was light, but Eleanor saw the curiosity in his eyes. That night, she laid both postcards on her bedside table and stared at them before sleep, wondering who sent them and why she felt as though the harbour itself was somehow calling her name. By the time the third postcard arrived, Eleanor's mornings had developed a quiet ritual. Tea in one hand, the little brass mailbox key in the other, heart beating just a bit faster than it used to. But that morning, the air felt different before she even stepped outside. The sky was still tinted with the soft pink of dawn, the kind of colour that fades if you blink too long. The card was waiting for her, its edges slightly curled, as though it had travelled a very long way. This time, the scene showed the harbour at twilight, the sea painted in ripples of violet and rose. A narrow cobblestone street wound its way from the pier toward an old inn, its timbered facade warm with golden lamplight. In one of the upper windows, just behind a gauzy curtain, a faint silhouette stood, as if watching for someone. Eleanor tilted the card, and for the briefest second, she thought she saw the curtain shift, a slow, deliberate movement, as though the figure knew she was looking. On the back, written in that same elegant script, were 5 words that made her breath catch. "Your room is ready, Eleanor." She froze, staring at her name. She had never shared it beyond her small circle of neighbours and the post office. Yet here it was, inked with such certainty. That afternoon, she carried the postcard to Mr. Whittaker's shop, sliding it across the counter. He adjusted his spectacles, squinting at the image, and leaned back in his chair. "If I didn't know better," he said slowly, "I'd say someone's inviting you to step right into that picture." His words lingered in her mind as she walked home, the card clutched tightly in her hand. That night she placed it on her nightstand beside the first two. But as she drifted towards sleep, she could have sworn a soft glow pulsed from the inked windows of the inn, as if beckoning her closer. 3 days passed without a new postcard, and Eleanor told herself she was relieved. But each evening she found her eyes drifting to the stack on her nightstand, wondering if she had imagined the warm glow in that inn's window. Then, on the fourth morning, she opened her mailbox to find an envelope instead of a card. Inside was a folded sheet of thick, cream-coloured paper, the kind used for invitations. It carried the faint scent of sea salt and lavender. Unfolding it, she found a hand-drawn map, marked with an inked trail, leading from a narrow pier to a crescent-shaped street called Moonlight Harbor Lane. At the end of the trail was a tiny X beside the sketch of the very inn she'd seen on the postcard. There was no letter, no explanation, only the map and a single pressed petal tucked into the fold, so pale it was almost silver. That evening, she took the map to Mr. Whittaker. He tapped a finger against the paper and murmured, "There's no such lane in this town, but that style of cartography, it's older than you might think." Eleanor left his shop with the map in her pocket, feeling both unmoored and inexplicably drawn forward, as though a tide she couldn't see was pulling her towards somewhere she had never been, and yet somehow remembered. The next night, the sound of rain woke Eleanor. It wasn't the familiar patter of summer showers on her roof. This was heavier, rhythmic, almost like waves against a pier. She rose and padded to the window, only to find that the street outside looked subtly altered. The lamplight was dimmer, the air thicker with mist, and in the distance she could just make out the faint glow of a line of lanterns swaying in the dark. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped outside. The world around her unusually hushed except for that steady, tide-like rhythm. The lanterns seemed to recede whenever she approached, leading her farther down the lane. The map from the envelope burned in her pocket like a secret she couldn't ignore. Eventually, the cobblestones under her feet gave way to wooden planks, slick with moisture, and before her stretched a pier that didn't exist in daylight. At the very end stood the inn from the postcards, its windows lit with a warm, welcoming glow. The door slightly ajar. Somewhere inside, faint music played. A slow, lilting waltz. And for a moment, Eleanor forgot she was standing in the rain. She stepped forward, hand on the door, heart steady but ready, as if she had finally reached a place she'd been walking toward her entire life. Eleanor stepped inside, the air instantly warmer, scented with chamomile, cedarwood, and something faintly sweet, like baked pears. A low fire crackled in the hearth, throwing amber light across the polished wooden floor. Behind a counter stood a man with silver threaded hair, wearing a waistcoat that seemed to shimmer faintly under the firelight. "Welcome," he said, his voice rich and even, as though he had been expecting her. "We've kept your place ready." She hesitated. "My place?" He gestured toward a table by the window, where 2 teacups steamed beside a plate of small moon-shaped biscuits. "Sit. You've come far." She obeyed, the chair creaking softly beneath her. Outside, the fog curled around the lanterns, framing the view of the harbour she had memorized from the postcards. As she sipped the tea, honeyed, warm, with a floral note she couldn't place, she felt the room subtly shift. The fire's crackle slowed, the music softened, and the man behind the counter leaned in slightly. "Moonlight Harbor finds those who are ready to remember what they've forgotten," he said, his gaze kind but unyielding. "What is it you've left behind, Eleanor?" Her fingers stilled on the cup, and for the first time she realized she didn't quite know how to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. "I think I've been waiting for something, but I can't name it." The man nodded, as if this was an answer he'd heard before. From the far corner of the room, a woman emerged, tall, with hair like drifting smoke, and a shawl patterned in constellations. She carried a small wooden box, which she placed gently on Eleanor's table. "These belong to you," she said. Inside were more postcards, all showing different corners of the harbour, each one lit by the same silver blue glow of the moon. Some depicted places she had never seen. A narrow staircase carved into the cliffs, a glass house overflowing with night-blooming flowers, a quiet library lit only by candles floating in glass bowls. "How?" Eleanor began, but the woman raised a hand. They arrive when you are ready to visit them. Some you will see soon, some you will keep for later. The man poured her another cup of tea. Every traveller leaves with something, Eleanor. The question is, what will you take with you when you go? The fire popped softly, and for a moment the harbour outside seemed to pulse with light, as though waiting for her to step into its embrace. When Eleanor finally left the inn, the mist had thinned, revealing a long crescent of moonlight laid across the water. She carried the wooden box of postcards under her arm, their edges cool to the touch, as though they had been dipped in starlight. The lanterns along the pier still swayed gently, but now she noticed that each one held a different symbol carved into its base: a key, a compass, a pair of wings. She paused at the last lantern before the shore, turning back for one final look at the inn. The windows glowed, and in one she thought she saw the silver-haired man raise his teacup in farewell. By the time she reached the end of the pier, the inn was gone, replaced by a stretch of fog and open water. She stepped onto the cobblestone lane, the sound of waves fading behind her. When she reached her own street, the sky was paling toward dawn. Inside her home, she set the box on her desk and placed the first postcard on top. She didn't yet know what the harbour wanted to show her next, but she knew it would come quietly when the clock struck 3:03 and the world was ready to shift again. The end. Thank you for joining us tonight on Storytime Boulevard for Postcards from Moonlight Harbor. May its quiet lanterns and silver-lit waters follow you into your dreams, bringing you rest, warmth, and a little mystery to carry into tomorrow. Sleep well, dear listener, until we meet again under the moonlight.